What's going on, you guys? This is Ryan from Watfix here, and today we have a brand new video for you. We're going to be counting down my top 10 favorite wrestlers of all time. This was probably the most difficult video to make. My top 5 was pretty easy, but just who I included on the other 5 and people I left off, it was really difficult. There are guys like Randy Orton, Batista, Triple H, just a really large amount of guys that I really wanted to put on this list, but unfortunately, they did not make it. So without further ado, let's start. Coming in at number 10, we have Y2J Chris Jericho. One of the main reasons why Chris Jericho made this list was his return in 2007. Now, I started watching wrestling back in around 2006, and I never really saw anything like what happened with Jericho with all the cryptic messages and the lead up to it and the who broke the code and whatnot. And it was probably one of my favorite moments in wrestling when he did come back, and I didn't really know much about him, but his return and the crowd response and everything, it's one of my favorite memories in wrestling. Chris Jericho is probably one of the best in-ring wrestlers of all time. He's also one of the best characters of all time, and not only that, but to this day, he remains one of the most entertaining, as his most recent stuff is probably better than anything he's done in his career. He finds a way to be funny and balance that in with being a phenomenal in-ring wrestler, and for that reason, Chris Jericho is my 10th favorite wrestler of all time. Coming in at number 9, we have a more current day wrestler, and we have Kevin Owens. The reason why Kevin Owens is in my top 10 is for a number of reasons, actually, but mainly because he was basically my introduction to independent wrestling. Obviously, I knew there were other companies besides WWE, but when I first started getting into wrestling, and independent wrestling specifically, when I started watching again in 2013, he was really the first independent wrestler that I discovered before coming to WWE, then made it and became really big. I kind of feel like a proud dad in a weird way, because I watched him right before he came to WWE when he was doing his independent stuff, and then to become this huge star on such a bigger level. It's really awesome, and for that reason, Kevin Owens is on the list.
You just made the list! Oh no!
Coming in at number 8, we have HBK Shawn Michaels, as you can tell by the amount of figures that I have of him in my most recent one. I really do love Shawn Michaels. This is also more of a nostalgic pick. And just like Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels is a guy who's one of the best, if not the best, in-ring performer of all time. Also had a character, just had every aspect nailed down to a T in professional wrestling. I know a lot of people like to rant on his DX stuff in late 2000, but when I was a little kid, DX is probably my favorite tag team. I loved them so much because they were just so different from what everybody was doing, and I hated Spirit Squad when I was a youngling, so when him and Triple H always mess with them, it's honestly some of my favorite moments in wrestling. Also, one of my favorite wrestling matches of all time is Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker from WrestleMania 25. That match is absolutely mind-blowing, and the following match they had at the next year's WrestleMania, also a great match, but that match is just, oh my god, one of my favorites of all time. There's a lot of rumors that Shawn is coming back. I don't really believe them. It kind of gets my hopes up a little bit too much than I should, but I love Shawn Michaels a lot. Easily one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Coming in at number 7, we have Daniel Bryan. I started really loving Daniel Bryan when he won the Money in the Bank briefcase, and he started doing the yes thing, and when he beat Big Show. That was really funny. I really was enjoying Daniel Bryan at that time, but I really started loving Daniel Bryan when Team Hell No came about, because it really rejuvenated Kane's career, but it also really showed how much of a star Daniel Bryan can be. A lot of people rigged on Daniel Bryan and teased him for not being able to cut a promo or whatever, or not showing enough character, but that Team Hell No stuff honestly was so funny, and it showed that he has more character than a lot of people wrestling right now. Daniel Bryan's rise to WrestleMania 30 is probably one of my favorite stories in all of wrestling. It was probably the most emotionally frustrating, and at the same time, it was the most relieving when he finally won the title at WrestleMania, beating Triple H in the first match. That was a great match, and then of course going on to win the main event of WrestleMania 30, holding up both titles, probably one of my favorite moments in all of wrestling. And the retirement of Daniel Bryan is probably one of 2 times where I legitimately cried after it was over. I was sobbing and I was so upset because it was just so upsetting to see this guy just retire at such a young age after everything he's done, and he could have gone on to do such more, but the concussions obviously ended his career early, and Daniel Bryan is easily one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, and he was also one of my favorite wrestlers to ever meet. Coming in at number 6, we have the Rated R Superstar Edge. Which is the weirdest pick on here because when I was really young, I hated him so much. But even when I was young, I hated him so much that I thought he was awesome, and I always had all of his action figures. It's really weird because I hated him, but I loved him at the same time. And just all the stuff he did with John Cena, probably one of my favorite feuds of all time. And his return when he came back finally as a good guy, probably one of the coolest returns of all time in the Royal Rumble. He's had so many great feuds and so many great matches, and once again, he's another one of those careers that ended way too early. But Edge is easily one of my favorite superstars of all time. And coming in at number 5, we have probably my favorite current wrestler, Dean Ambrose. When I started watching wrestling again in 2013, the Shield was basically on top, and Ambrose, for some reason, just always stuck out to me. I always thought he was different than the other two. The way he talks, the way he carries himself, the way he it's just everything he does, it's so different than everybody else, which is another reason why you're going to see a lot of people on this list. But Dean Ambrose has every aspect nailed. He's a phenomenal wrestler. He's had some of the best matches of his career with the Shield and out of it. So for that reason, I'm going to put Dean Ambrose as my number 5. And coming in at number 4, as you can also tell by the amount of figures I have of him, and this isn't even all of it, we have The Undertaker. Whenever I think of wrestling, Undertaker is probably the first person that comes to mind. When I was really young, Undertaker managed to scare me and yet be my favorite wrestler at the same time. Undertaker managed to have some of the greatest matches of all time as well. Like I said, the Shawn Michaels matches were great, the Triple H match, the CM Punk match at WrestleMania, and that's only WrestleMania matches. And when you think of WrestleMania, the streak always comes up. It was probably one of those things that was guaranteed with WrestleMania. The streak ending is probably one of the most shocking moments, but one of my favorite moments, because I've never been so surprised in wrestling. I really wasn't expecting it to end. Undertaker continues his career to this day, and I really hope he doesn't retire soon, even though there was like some picture of him floating around on crutches. I love The Undertaker, and if he can stay along for as long as he can, then I hope that's what happens. Coming in at number 3, we have CM Punk. One of the biggest reasons I probably gravitate to CM Punk as being one of my favorite wrestlers of all time is probably because he comes across as one of the most real wrestlers ever. The pipe bomb promo is probably the first time in wrestling where it really blurred the lines of reality, even when I was older, where I really had to think back and question whether or not it was real, and it just instantly made me the biggest fan of CM Punk. Even when he debuted, I always liked him because he looked different and he wrestled different, and the GTS is probably one of my favorite finishers of all time. And when Punk turned on Jeff Hardy, that also was one of my favorite feuds of all time because Punk was always a good guy, and even when I was younger, I was really confused as to why he was always such a good guy. And when he turned on Jeff Hardy, that was just awesome. I was a really big fan of Jeff Hardy at the time too, and that feud was amazing. Punk really became a huge star coming out of it. Also, the matches he had with John Cena, specifically Money in the Bank, I believe 2011 was it? That was one of my favorite matches of all time. So I love CM Punk. Obviously, I was distraught when he left, but Punk is easily one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And coming in at number 2, we have the man himself, John Cena. Now, the reason why Cena's on here is because he's probably the only wrestler on this list I felt so nostalgic about, yet who I love so much currently. There was a little period from like 2008 to 2010 where I was getting really low on Cena, but the feud with Punk really just rejuvenated my love for John Cena. He's always such a badass, and when I was younger, he won every feud, so it really made me like him. He really was the Superman of WWE. And not only this, and I talk about a lot of his run in 2006 and whatnot, but his run in 2015 as a US champion, probably my favorite run of his. It really could be, because he was having phenomenal matches every single week. The Open Challenge really, I think, changed a lot of people's opinion of John Cena, because he managed to have all of these great matches and all of these great feuds with Kevin Owens, and also his feuds earlier with Edge and Randy Orton. Well, maybe not the Orton one, but CM Punk. And all these guys were all great. John Cena is absolutely my second favorite wrestler of all time. And coming in at number 1, he's a guy I talked about a lot before. It is absolutely my favorite wrestler of all time. We have Rob Van Dam. Actually kind of funny that I only have one RVD figure, yet he's my favorite wrestler of all time. So when I first started watching, it was around the ECW One Night Stand 2006 pay-per-view, and my brother was a really big John Cena fan, and he was going into a feud with RVD. RVD was probably the first wrestler that I actually tried going back when I was really young and seeing what he was like. I thought at first his attire was really awesome, and it really made me like him. when he beat Cena, it really made me want to go back and see what he did in the past, and it was really my first introduction to ECW and a lot of the other wrestling promotions, and he was one of the reasons why I started watching TNA at the time that he debuted. One of the bummiest things to think about him is that he's not in WWE right now. I know he's not that young, but I still think he has it, and I hope he returns one day. And that does it for my favorite wrestlers of all time. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what your list is down below, 1 to 10. I'm really interested to see. And as always, stay tuned to the next one.